Have you ever wanted to read St. Augustine's Confessions, but felt overwhelmed by the thought? Well, our guest tonight is one of the co-hosts of the Catholic Classics podcast from Ascension Press, where he helps break open ancient texts from beloved saints. Father Gregory Pine is a Dominican friar who's currently a doctoral candidate in dogmatic theology at the University of Freiburg in Switzerland. In addition to his role as co-host of the Catholic Classics podcast, Father Gregory is also a regular contributor to the popular podcasts Pints with Aquinas, Godsplaining, and the Thomistic Institute. The Catholic Classics podcast on the Confessions of St. Augustine premieres next Monday, October 2nd. You can pick up Ascension Press's version with fresh commentary now. Welcome to the Busted Halo Show, Father Gregory Pine.
Hello.
How are you?
No, I'm doing pretty well, actually.
I remember when we talked to you when you
first
went to when you first went to Freiburg. We were talking to you. Yeah.
So I am actually back from Freiburg. I'm still a doctoral candidate at the University of Freiburg on account of the fact that you have to wait like some large number of weeks before you defend your dissertation, so that way you can cook in your own nervous juices. But I am back in the United States of America, so may God bless this land.
How was Switzerland? Did you enjoy living there? Some nice fondue, some chocolates, some cheeses?
Right, yes. So there are a variety of things that one can enjoy whilst in Switzerland, fondue being one of them. My experience, though, with that is that if you fill your stomach with a vat of boiling cheese, that it goes just about as well as you might imagine. So it's like a kind of cheese-based combustion engine, which sees you through the entirety of the night. So you just play that out in every imaginative direction. It's all true.
Father Gregory is now dairy-free now that he's back in the U.S., apparently.
You joke, man, but I had my oat milk this morning. Still traumatized.
Still
bubbling
traumatized.
cheese cauldron inside of him.
Yeah.
You'll have a doctorate in dogmatic theology. Would that mean, Father Gregory, at some point you would be maybe a professor of theology? Is that the goal?
So in quintessential Dominican fashion, we ask men to do things for which they are neither competent nor especially well suited. So I am at present a professor of theology. So the joke's on them being my students. And that's my last word.
Got them.
My students next year will have the benefit of a guy with a doctorate. So
exactly. So at least when they cry themselves to sleep, they can repose on the fact that the man who taught them these things was credentialed.
Now, Father Gregory, I thought I was a priest who spent a lot of time talking into microphones. You are on 4 different podcasts. Good Lord. How do you have time to prepare your studies for your classes?
Great question. So yeah. I mean, I could, oh gosh, sweet Lord, precious Savior, save me from myself. There are moments when like I get to my desk and it's time to do a thing that is for the people of God. And I'm like, I would rather slam my hands repeatedly into a freezer door than type out this next word. But for whatever reason, it keeps going. And I'm sure there are people listening, like there's like a whole bunch of people listening who are like, I wish I could just feed him and let him nap and other things that would make him feel better about his life. But it's not going to happen, folks. I'm just going to be this tired and this hungry for the rest of my life.
He's this guy. You're tired and hungry?
I just give that vibe. People just try to feed me wherever I go.
The Pints with Aquinas seems to help out in this regard, at least.
Yeah, that is true. Except another thing that's significant about Switzerland is that the beer game there is poor. So my discovery was that most of the mainline beers taste like they've been passed recently through a rusty pipe. So if you're into oxidation, go for it. If not, yeah, again, God bless America.
He's so happy to be back.
I know, it's great. Rusty Pints with Aquinas.
And things other than cheese.
Yeah.
Father Gregory Pine is a Dominican friar, and you are based where now that you're back in the States? Are you in D.C.?
I am in D.C., yep.
Okay, so I walked by your castle just a couple of weeks ago when I was there.
Oh, nice. Okay, perfect. Yeah.
We were there for our final profession of 2 of our men and then their deacon ordination at the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception just across the street. It's probably the only other edifice in the area that is more grand than the house you live in.
Yeah, my house has been called many things in its day. I've heard it called Castle Grim by those who don't appreciate it. I've heard it called the Ice Palace as well, which is kind of charming. I suppose that's like the one thing where I'm like Princess Elsa of Arendelle, is that I live in a nice
That is
palace.
the one way in which you are
Exactly.
similar.
Yeah.
I sent Brett and Krista a photo as I was walking in front of the Dominican House of Studies. Brett and Krista, remember that? It was quite the white. It was a lot of white because they wear white habits, so the house is white too.
Exactly. We only have white appurtenances. Yeah, we're totally anti other colored appurtenances. So it's just like
they're just waiting for your beard to change to white over the years.
Oh, well, that'll happen.
Oh yeah, give me time. Just give me time.
Well, Father Gregory Pine is the co-host of the Catholic Classics podcast, along with Father Bertram, right? Jacob Bertram. He's the co-host with you. Now, have you done on the Classics? Have you done other church fathers besides Saint Augustine? Like, what was season 1?
Season 1 was Introduction to the Devout Life by St. Francis de Sales, which was nice, super wheelhousey.
The classics are classic works, not just people. So you're talking about like the Confessions is written by St. Augustine, Devout Life by St. Francis de Sales. So you dive into like a classic work.
You know, like those books that Catholics say to themselves, I wish I wanted to read the fill in the blank, but I need something to motivate me.
Right.
Like I am a small ship in the midst of a tumultuous sea. I wish I had a cute little outboard motor that would conduct me to my destination being having read this book. That's what the podcast is. It's just like a little outboard motor. Yeah.
So we used to, like back in my day, I'm a little older than you, Father Gregory. Back in my day, we had Cliff's Notes or Reader's Digest. You kind of give people the bullet points, the important stuff.
Yeah, so like the first half of each episode is we read them the book, because there's nothing like having an audiobook read to you by someone who is not a voice actor, because then you get to experience like, it's like the LibriVox thing. When you go on LibriVox, you're like, I want a free book. And then you're like, this was recorded as an ESL exercise by somebody in class, in Southern Slovakia. And like, this is going to be awesome. So that is exactly the listening experience that we provide, as you might imagine. My goal is like with every episode, I see how many words I can pronounce within one breath. So it gets increasingly hasty. No, just kidding. I would never. And then the latter half is color commentary. Okay. So it's supposed to be based on the text itself and to help you read and unpack it. As to whether we accomplish that end, we leave it to the discerning judgment of our listeners.
But over the course of the podcast series, do you actually read the entire text at some point, or do you have select pieces?
The entire text. For the completionist in you, feed the beast.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, you're like, wow, I was interested, and now I'm
I got to spend some time with this podcast.
That seems like a lot. I'm glad you read it hastily. Yeah.
Like, how long is your commute? Holy smokes!
And you're doing 4 different podcasts, so you just don't sleep. But you're right. I get it.
Let me pop over to Pints with Aquinas now.
Exactly.
Gotta help them sleep, I hope. Yeah.
Well, maybe, Father Gregory, to give some of our listeners here who may or may not, maybe they'll be motivated to go check out the podcast, but give them a little sense of many people know who St. Augustine is, and maybe they've heard of the Confessions, but what is it? Is it fair to say it's like, is it a diary of him describing his sinful life and now this is how he came to Jesus? Is it his Come to Jesus volume?
It's basically his Come to Jesus volume. And I think, there are a variety of things which are very interesting or very cool about it. If St. Augustine will admit me using the word cool to describe his work, he'd be like, I scoff at the word cool. You unruly child. I'd be like, sorry. It's noble. So St. Augustine writes it about like a little more than midway through his life, and he's reflecting on basically how he came to faith. So it's divided up into 13, what we would call chapters, the first 10 of which treat his life, and then the latter 3 of which are kind of wild exegetical slam dance performed on the first 2 chapters of the book of Genesis. So a lot of people find those to be very difficult. And as a result of which, those last 3, yeah. But the first 10, they're like, this is awesome because it's kind of the first in its genre of biography, or of, autobiography, I should say. And he's hypersensitive to his own kind of physical, emotional, and psychological state in conversation with the spiritual dimension, which God is, kind of conducting sovereignly. And so he gives you a really acute, or what's the word that I'm looking for, penetrating description of Christian conversion. And you get to experience all the anguish of it. So if you've ever been in a position where you're like, you know what, I was listening to Busted Halo the other day, and I was convinced that I should adopt some more penances into my life, so I think I'm going to give up my 15th cup of coffee. And then it comes time to give up said 15th cup of coffee, and you're like, For those of you who can't hear me screaming, I am screaming. It's a kind of silent scream. But like you get to that point where you're like, who will deliver me from this body of death? Left to my own devices, I will not have 15. I will have 16 cups of coffee. So we've all felt our own kind of moral bankruptcy at a certain level. And St. Augustine describes that in really, really cool fashion. And so you enter into it with him, but as a result of which you have a deeper appreciation for the movement of grace and God's gift of himself, which is quite sweet.
Would people be, based on today's worlds and today's norms and mores, would they, do you think, be scandalized by, oh my gosh, he did that? Because it certainly seems he is. Like, he's disgusted with his own sin.
He certainly is. Yeah, but he's also, he's a good storyteller. You know how some people are like, now I'm going to tell you my witness story. And then they spend the next 17 minutes describing in detail the various drugs that they, indulged in, and then like the various dubious relationships that they indulged in, and then the various fill in the blank. And you're like, holy smokes, bad life. And they're like, and then Jesus came and cleaned it all up, and I am happy. And you're like, what was that actually a witness to?
Yeah.
Were you just trying to impress me with all the bad stuff you did?
Sounded like the 70s. I've heard this before.
Was that like a little bit of a boast? Did I just hear you boasting?
He's pretty pumped there in the middle of that.
You really give Jesus a lot of credit in that whole.
This is the very end.
Yeah, and then I met this swell fella named that's Christ. So no, it's not like that. He has a great sense of balance, and so he gives you significant indication. All right, I was doing bad things. You get the basic idea. Like, I have a son. How do you think that happened? But then he's able to turn his gaze to the work of grace, even as it advances like slowly in his life and gradually distances himself from sin and vice and draws him into relationship. So I think like that ultimately what's most interesting in life, God and his sovereign work. And so he's able to direct your gaze to that which is most interesting.
So St. Augustine, as you're saying, pretty good writer.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, like, as far as prose stylists go, he's the best of the best because that was his job. Like, he was a rhetor or an orator, and he taught people rhetoric. So when it comes to crafting phrases, he's unsurpassed. Like that, most people think it's just like a Matt Maher song. You called and you shouted and you broke through my deafness, ... Well, that's just St. Augustine from the Confessions. It's translated from Latin into English. That'd be awesome if we did an entirely Latin podcast of just made up nonsense Latin because we're not capable of speaking coherent Latin.
You should add that to your workload immediately. I think you should do an all Latin podcast.
Five podcasts.
Your fifth one, it's all in Latin.
Exactly. A fifth podcast to rule them all and in the darkness bind them. But so he writes beautifully, and you get caught up in the poetry of it, provided that the person reading the audiobook to you doesn't ruin it.
Which may... That's me.
Yeah. Trying not to have that be himself. Got it. Okay.
We're talking about the Catholic Classics podcast. Well, you guys gotta... I don't know. It's not easy.
Yeah, I know. Honestly, beginning of every episode, we're like, hey, welcome to Catholics. It's like... impossible to say.
Everyone Catholic... read the title on their own at your house. We'll take it from there.
Yeah.
Catholic Classics podcast. So you did, and it was the two of you that did the season one as well. So people will be familiar with the two of your color commentary. Given that you're pursuing your doctorate in theology, do you each have, like when you watch sports, like each guy contributes his own sort of thing? Like what's you and your co-host's thing?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's a great thing. So we both have a similar formation, and so we're able to have conversations on similar themes. But his thing is like the kind of sassy stick in the mud, and charmingly so. He's like, but yeah, are we sure about that? And my thing is like kind of hype man, like the pump up dude in the background, the guy that you brought to your middle school, specifically your public middle school, because you couldn't have like a witness talk. So you had like one of these secular types try to convince you that life was worth living as you death scrolled on your newly purchased iPhone 7. It's like, it's gonna be great. So that's my vibe.
That's you. Okay.
So he's the cynic and you're the hype man. That's what you're saying.
Exactly. Yeah.
Father Jacob Bertrand Jancic and Father Gregory Pine are the hosts of the Catholic Classics podcast. This season that premieres on Monday will be about St. Augustine's Confessions. I have heard occasionally, not from all corners of Catholicism, but some, that we certainly draw over the centuries. We've drawn a lot, particularly of our moral theology, from Augustine. And some people have critiqued that he was a little sort of overreactionary to his own, how bad he was. And other people kind of raising their hand and going, like, okay, well, that's not everybody, Augustine. You don't need to saddle us all with that. Do the confessions give us kind of an insight into that?
They certainly do. Yeah. I mean, he doesn't talk too much about the moral theory, but one thing you do get is various descriptions of, on the one hand, the nonsense of evil or the incoherence of evil, and on the other hand, the goodness of creation. So you can see him working his way through, because he passed through a variety of steps or stages on his way to Catholicism. So he has a kind of pagan stage, although, from a young age, he's a catechumen. So his mother, St. Monica, was Christian. His father was, I guess, a pagan, I suppose. So he kind of has a pagan stage, and then he gets interested in philosophy when he reads the Hortensius of Cicero. And then he finds these Platonic thinkers.
Yeah, no,
exactly. Yep, exactly. Yep. I that's why I mentioned it.
Like most people.
I try to name drop Latin texts and just ever so slightly mispronounce them. So that way I impress most people and then exhaust the Latin scholars who are tuning in.
A true hype man, hyping up the Latin
exactly.
classics.
I'm here for you. I am here for you. So yeah, like Platonism, and then he gets involved with this heresy called Manichaeanism, which the long and the short of it is they think that the created world is bad because it's not made by God. It's made by like a creepy demigod. And so he has to like vindicate the goodness of creation. And you can see him working his way out in conversation with the incoherence of evil, which he's experienced at a very deep level. And so, yeah, it's fascinating to see the moral theory come together.
Wow. This makes me want to listen to this podcast.
Yeah. Although the cynic and the hype man has a easier ring to it. Than the
yeah, why don't you call it that?
The cynic and it's not a bad idea. That is not a bad idea.
That's why they.
And then in like fine print, who happen to be priests.
Well, once it says with father and father,
I suppose so. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we'll put a link on our radio blog at bustedalo.com/radio to where you can easily, wherever podcasts are distributed, find the season 2 of the Catholic Classics podcast from Ascension Press. Father Gregory Pine and his co-host, Father Jacob Bertrand Jancic, will walk you through the Confessions of St. Augustine. So, like, how many episodes?
Oof, 60.
No, it's not 60.
Oh, I wish I were kidding. I wish I were kidding. Yeah, just think of it this way. So picture yourself signing up for Bible in a year, right? 365. Add away. Now just divide it by 6. No problem. And then subtract, like 0.8.
Right. And then it sounds like it's not that many. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
more like the cynic than the
Bible in a
hype
year
man
divided
right
by
now.
6,
Hold on.
subtract 0.83. That is the best advertisement I've given so far.
I don't think 60's that bad. He's reading the whole thing.
60 episodes of I mean, people do 6 and they're like exhausted. Like, okay, we'll give you another 6 next year.
People have been listening to our show for 16 years, once a day. That's a lot more than 60. So
That is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is.
That's a large
sympathizing
number.
with him.
So
It's a
take
lot.
that number,
Take
divide
that
it by
number,
16, then divide it by 6, and then subtract 0.83. You got yourself a deal.
All right.
Well, that sounds fun. Father Gregory Pine, always great to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. And tune into all 60 episodes of his podcast at the Catholic Classics podcast. A link at bustedhalo.com/radio.